Welcome back, everyone, to the Wedge 52 Gridiron podcast. I'm your host, Wedge. Today's episode is the 10-minute report, Bengals. Before we jump into today's episode, please make sure you follow me right here on Spotify, rate the podcast, as well as check out the Instagram at Wedge 52 Gridiron. If you guys are unfamiliar with the 10-minute report series, that is where I take 20 minutes of study plus my already established knowledge to create a 10-minute podcast. With that being said, let's jump into today's episode, the 10-minute report on the Cincinnati Bengals. Starting off with Joe Burrow and the recent training camp injury that most of you have seen by now, I'm sure. While rolling out to his right, Joe Burrow seemed to have tweaked something in his leg and was carted off the field. It has been confirmed that that was a calf strain injury, so good news for the Bengals and Joe Burrow. That wasn't an Achilles or ACL type of injury, but it's just recently been announced that head coach Zach Taylor said that Joe Burrow will be out several weeks. He did not put a specific date on that, but a grade 1 calf strain is normally a 1 to 3 or 4 weeks recovery time, and a grade 2 calf strain is normally about 4 to 8 weeks. So it's looking like I'm sure that the Bengals would be playing it safer rather than pressing the timeline with Burrow. So I would not be surprised if he is not healthy and full go until right around before the season starts, and potentially even consider waiting a couple weeks into the season. But the season, end of August, is about 6 weeks away now. So it would definitely be interesting to see how Joe Burrow develops and what that means for the Bengals. Last year, Joe Burrow put up very good numbers for the second year in a row. Last year, he had 4,475 passing yards, 35 touchdowns, 12 interceptions on 68.3% completion percentage. Very good numbers from him, obviously. They have a very dangerous offense. It certainly helps when they have potentially the best 1-2 wide receiver combo. It's either the Bengals, the Dolphins, who I think might take the edge, or the Eagles. So it definitely helps to have a top 3 wide receiver duo. And then he also had 257 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. So Burrow has quickly turned into one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And when he gets healthy, I would expect another great year from Joe Burrow. But in the backfield, they had Joe Mixon, who recently restructured his deal a couple weeks ago. And he took a $4.3 million pay cut to help out the Bengals salary cap. And he will be making $5.51 million in 2023. And his deal is good through 2024. So he will for sure be a Bengal this year and next year, unless they decide to trade him for whatever reason. Last year, Mixon had 814 rushing yards to go along with 7 touchdowns on the ground. And then moving on to the very deadly wide receiver duo, and the Bengals actually have a great wide receiver trio. But last year, Jamar Chase had 1,046 yards and 9 receiving touchdowns. Both of those numbers were actually down for him, who I believe in his rookie year had about 1,300 receiving yards and 13 touchdowns. And he earned himself offensive rookie of the year, I think, and second team All-Pro. So those numbers were both down for him. I don't expect that trend to continue, going down by 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. But if it does, it'd certainly be something to look at. And then T. Higgins last year had 1,029 yards and 7 touchdowns last season with the Bengals. And then their number 3 option, Tyler Boyd, had 762 yards and 5 touchdowns. Again, very explosive weapons. The Bengals' offensive threat is, their offense is one of the best in the league. Part of the one thing that was kind of holding them back the past few years, and kind of always, but especially since Burrow's been there, is their offensive line play. To kind of help combat that this offseason, they signed tackle Orlando Brown to a 4-year, $64 million deal. Brown played last season in Kansas City, where he allowed 4 sacks and had 6 penalties on him. Throughout all of his pass blocking plays last season, he had a 5.4% pressure rate last season as a starting left tackle. In his 5 seasons in the NFL with Baltimore, Kansas City, and now he'll be a Bengal. So far up in his career, he's only allowed 16 sacks, so a very solid left tackle for the Bengals to pick up this offseason, and should hopefully turn their offensive line around, at least from where it was last year. They have Williams at right tackle now, and they're hoping for some more improvement from him after last year was his first season switching over from the left tackle position. So they're hoping that he has a full season of right tackle under his belt now, and they're hoping for improvement and stability out of him. And then they have Carreras and Kappa, who are decent. And then just their unit as a whole, last year I would say was bottom third in the league, maybe even bottom quarter. But with the addition of Orlando Brown and Williams' second full season at right tackle, they're hoping that their offensive line can jump towards the middle of the pack in terms of offensive line unit. And now moving over to the defensive side of the ball for the Cincinnati Bengals, their biggest question is going to be at the safety position because they lost both of their starting safeties from last season due to free agency. That would be Jesse Bates III and Von Bell. I believe Bates went to Atlanta and Von Bell signed in Carolina. So they're going to be without them. And they both had pretty solid seasons last year. And to kind of help replace those guys, they signed safety Nick Scott, who was with the Los Angeles Rams last year, and actually had a decent year with 86 tackles, 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, and 5 passes defense. So definitely a good addition to fill the void of either Bates or Bell. That's one of those guys. And then they also decided to draft Jordan Battle, 95th overall in the 3rd round out of Alabama, who last year had himself 71 tackles, 1 interception, and 2 passes defense. Obviously not the top safety on Alabama's squad last year. That would definitely be Brian Branch. But those 2 guys should hopefully be serviceable options for the Bengals to fill the void of players they lost in free agency. Moving down to the box for them, their front 7 consists of edge rusher Trey Hendrickson, who last year had 32 tackles, 8 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, and 3 forced fumbles. All very good numbers. And then opposite of him was edge rusher Sam Hubbard, who last year had 60 tackles, 6.5 sacks, and 11 tackles for a loss. So a great season for Hubbard. He also had the fumble recovery for a touchdown against my Ravens in the playoffs. I'm not sure why we were trying to dive over the top from 3 yards out with the backup quarterback, but that's a different story. And then also to further strengthen the defensive end and edge for the Bengals, they decided to draft Clemson edge rusher Myles Murphy, 28th overall in this year's draft. Last year at Clemson, Murphy had 40 tackles, 6.5 sacks, and 11 tackles for a loss. So definitely a solid first-round draft pick for them. It was probably going to be, if it wasn't O-line, it's probably a solid positional selection to continue to have strong edge rushers who have become more and more valuable in the NFL the past few years. And then they have a very solid linebacking duo with Jermaine Pratt, who last year had 99 tackles, 6 tackles for a loss, 10 passes defense, and 1 sack. So Pratt has been very good past couple of years. Last year he was very good in coverage with those 10 passes defense. And then at the other linebacker spot, they have Logan Wilson, who last year had 123 tackles, 4 passes defense, 2.5 sacks, and 3 tackles for a loss. So that wraps up my 10-minute report on the Cincinnati Bengals, which leaves me with just one thing remaining, which is my record prediction for the 2023 Cincinnati Bengals, where I predict they will go 13-4. Thank you all for listening to the Wedge 52 Gridiron podcast. Once again, please make sure to follow and rate the podcast right here on Spotify, as well as check out my many other episodes. That's all I have today. Thank you for listening, and go Ravens.